Welcome to another episode of the Straight Up Chicago Investor Podcast. I'm 𝗤𝗁𝗃𝗀𝗃, licensed agent with Second City Real Estate. With me, as always, is Mark Ainley, founder and owner of 𝗣𝚗𝗱𝗰. Mark, what do you want our listeners to do?
Smash that like button and leave us a review and refer us to friends.
It loses energy every time you say something. It starts off high with a smash. And then the second or third thing is kind of like, if you want to do this.
Yeah, no. It's got to be entertainment. Here's the thing. We're just going to stop recording these and adding value to all you guys if you guys don't keep referring us.
You're making threats to the audience.
Now we'll threaten everybody.
That's a good way to do this.
You know what's so funny, though? When as you were telling me that I have less energy for that, I was thinking, I'm like, that was kind of a weak comment. Like you said, welcome, a lot lighter than he normally does. So,
oh man, I'm sorry. It's Friday too. We're recording this on a Friday. We're
recording a second one after, so I'm expecting you to really bring the energy on the next one in that welcome.
It's gonna be
welcome sets the tone for the whole show.
Let's pick it up. So we were kind of bantering before the show. I think we'd like to see both success stories and failures from the people listening to this podcast. Right. I think that'd be very beneficial for others who are listening. You just say, hey, this was the deal I did, and not like put me on a pedestal like, well, I'm awesome. But like, we love to hear about like, hey, what went wrong? What went well? Did you get the rents you want? What are some things you do differently? We found that when we've done some more like call it deal deep dive type episodes, those have been very well received. And so based on that, we feel that'd be valuable to our listeners. So if you've done a deal recently, we'd love to hear from you. If you'd love to share it, whether it be a blog, if we do a Tuesday tip on it. But there's demand there. So we're making the assumption that that's providing value. So again, we're almost open solicitation to let us know, and we can look to market it for you.
Yeah, keep it in mind. We started this show on the premise that no one ever wants to hear someone go on and how wonderful they did and how many millions they've made. And we'll hear that, but we also want to hear the tough mornings, the tough decisions, the times you want to give up. And when you go through these transactions, especially your first couple, there's so much doubt that comes through those. We want to get you on here. We want to talk to you about those. And we're going to have some of those conversations today. So I'm excited about today's guest. But that's the raw reality behind being a real estate investor. And the value you're going to bring specific to Chicago is huge. So reach out. A lot of you guys have our email. We'll put my email in the show notes. And then obviously straight up Chicago investor @gmail.com. You do that, or you could go on the contact us page, or chat us on Facebook. But we'd love to have you, whether it be a Tuesday tip or be on a full episode. If we got some real deep dive to do, we'd love to have you on here.
Awesome. What do we got for the housing provider tip of the week?
All right. Housing provider tip of the week. The alleys in Chicago, when your tenants move out, they're leaving garbage out back. And it's always important. You might walk through the unit, you might walk through the garage, you might walk through the backyard, but oftentimes, and maybe this is a C and D class type issue more so than A and B class, but that's our experience. But they leave a lot of stuff in the alley, and you got to make sure that you're cleaning up that, because that ends up being a $500 or $600 fine when you don't realize it's back there. It's really easy not to walk through the back alley when you're doing a turnover or when you're walking the property after the tenant moved out. But make sure that you have in your process to be able to hit that back alley and make sure you clean up any garbage that's left behind. Usually they're putting furniture back there and a whole bunch of bags of dip in the garbage, because the garbage man usually is not going to pick those up. So prevent that fine and make sure you're checking the alley on the exit walkthrough.
Awesome. Your intro today. Let's do this.
Yes. I'm excited to have today's guest on. He has been someone I've been talking to for some time now. I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years, it feels like. Yeah. But today's guest, he grew up in Maine. So what I'm frustrated about is early on in the show, Maine was one of the last states that we got an initial person to listen to. So I should have triggered you to. I
forgot how obsessed you were with that.
to get a friend
from every state.
Yep.
Oh, I reached out. I had it.
All right. So he grew up in Maine. Grew up in Maine until 14. He moved to Sugar Grove, where he resides today. So we don't have too many far western, southwestern suburbs guests on here. So that's rare too. He's an arborist by trade, and by the age of 28, he reached the pinnacle of what he wanted to aspire to be as an arborist. And he decided to pivot his career. So starting with a couple of his previous rentals he had as primary residence, he turned those into the start of his portfolio. He put a massive amount of research, slamming down 52 books in 18 months to help him grow his real estate portfolio safely, securely, and with a sound base. Within the next couple of years, he continued to live below his means and build a strong financial base to start buying more turnkey single-family homes. He switched in 2020 to doing more along the lines of the BRRRR method with a bunch of add value. And towards the beginning of 2021, he's pivoted to become a broker to help others on the same path while continuing to build his portfolio. Today, he's an EXP, and he works in the largest EXP investor-focused team in Illinois, the Axon Group, which is we've had
proud sponsor.
Yep, it's a sponsor, proud sponsor, Jake and Michael. And without further ado, I want to introduce Zach Gring. Zach, welcome aboard.
Morning. How's it all going?
I bet. Before we dive any deeper into your story, I know people are asking, what's an arborist?
The arborist is the term I use for all encumbersome operations management and commercial sales that I do. It is everything from the plant healthcare end of it to taking down those big monster trees in your backyard that die off eventually.
Gotcha.
And
so can I reach out to you if I needed a falling, we have a tree that needs to be removed, can't be salvaged. Do I reach out to Zach, or are those days behind you?
Absolutely. No, definitely reach out. I actually work with quite a few investors. I did a pretty big project out in DeKalb for it's an investor out there that I work with too. So by all means, anyone and everyone, you've got some clearings, whatever, property cleanups, let me know.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you switched from being an arborist to, or not, you haven't switched, but you kind of got a little bored with it, hit your pinnacle, you said, and got into real estate. You already had a couple properties, with you. I always tell people that are looking to invest, like start turning and treating your existing properties as rentals as you did. But what was it really that made you really get interested in real estate? Like you didn't just pivot there. You had to have some kind of moment where you're like, holy cow, I think this is what I want to do.
There definitely was. There was the time when my first primary residence that I had turned into a rental probably close to 9 years ago. And, when I first turned it into that rental, by all investment strategies, it was a total loss. I mean, $200 a month above PITI, biggest house in the neighborhood, was not exactly the best investment. But in the course of the last 9 years of having the same renter in there, that property increase has gone up by 140,000. I've been getting rents up, and I mean, rents are up probably 60% from where they started at. And so now that's one of my best performing properties, so it's the time.
What area? Yeah. So we've mentioned this multiple times in the episode. Time is your biggest asset in real estate. Give us an idea. Where did you start? Like geographically, where are we talking here?
So geographically, that first primary was actually out in Cortland, which is a tiny little village just to the south of Sycamore, actually. So a fairly low appreciation area for the most part. But now I've started working my way kind of more towards the Tri-Cities and the Fox Valley area, and DuPage County more so now too, because I'm trying to weigh out the appreciation and cash flow at the same time.
Got it. So starting there, small town investing. Every time I drive through these, if I'm going out to like Galena or going, anywhere, I drive through, I'm like, man, is there one guy who owns like the 100 properties that are here? Right. Like, so like, what's it like owning in a small town like that? Is there any nuances our listeners should be aware of?
To be honest, there is definitely in DeKalb, which is definitely going to be a different demographic than Cortland and Sycamore. Cortland and Sycamore have a little bit better class properties, and DeKalb, you get the C and D class a lot more. And I know a lot of investors who do really well in DeKalb. I personally do not venture out into that area. I try to stay in the A and B class rentals these days. But in terms of, are there those people? Yes, absolutely. I believe that guy, John, is up to right around 40, 50 units in the same little 10, 15 block area of DeKalb. So there definitely is those people who niche out into those towns. Absolutely.
Got it. All right. So we buy that first property. Let's talk about some lessons learned, right? You'd shared a bunch of good notes to us before the show, but talk about just getting scrappy here and getting this thing done and wanting to scale, just like the sacrifices that need to be made to make that happen.
I mean, overall, between reading and educating, trying to come to the terms that, as a somewhat middle-class person who wants to, move into growing that portfolio. I mean, you really have to either leverage to the hills, or you're going to be working from a position of financial strength. And that's really rehabbing all of your personal finances. That's everything in your house. That's everything that's going on. And you have to be able, in my mind, there's no point in building a pyramid upside down. There's a reason they built it with a wide base, right? I mean, that's honestly what it comes down to. A lot of it is trying to pivot towards a point of first getting your financials in order and then being able to move into that.
I asked this question yesterday to another guest. And I'm curious, like, what does scrappy look like early on when you're trying to build your financial base to how'd you save money? Any funny things you went cheap on?
Funny things I cheap on. If I don't need it, I'm not going to buy it. Scrappy is taking every little extra bit and putting it towards some debt or putting it towards your savings account. And it's really coming down to, do I need this? Do I not need this? Is this a want? Is this a need? And it's something you really have to pay attention to. And, I also was able to come up with the plan, the idea to kind of bounce off the house hacking and go more towards what I call like a vehicle hack. And so I managed to pretty much transfer into a job similar in my arborist career, where I no longer had any sort of vehicle cost whatsoever, insurance, gas, none of it. And so for me, that saved me $1,200-1,500 a month, so that was a huge one. I mean, that's a huge living expense right there for anyone, right next to your housing is driving around. And so for me, that was definitely kind of a catalyst that helped me save a little bit more. Absolutely. I think it's getting creative and also just a hustle. I mean, finding that extra work, finding that extra job that you can do, finding those small side hustles that you can do to just start adding in, and being smart with your money too. I mean, it's not going out all the time. It's not going, blowing, $400, $500, $600 at the county fair. Maybe you're going to do 200 instead of that 600, it's,
he's so country, Tom. He's
county fair. This is great.
I knew that's not something that gets said in Jefferson Park often. So
we got Jeff Fest this weekend, but yeah.
I mean, in terms of,
sorry, Zach.
No, you're fine.
Well, we're dive into that first deal, kind of some of the obstacles that you didn't expect. Listen, you read a lot of books, you did a lot of research, you're on Bigger Pockets. Like, where are those, like, for that first deal that you did, like, where are those, like, holy cow, I prepared so much, but I did not see that happening, or man, I can't believe I made that decision after everything.
Yeah. So, switching from buying single family, turnkeys to going into deciding I wanted to do some sort of, BRRRR was, especially in 2020 with the pandemic going on, it was kind of a daring adventure for me, but it was, a great success story. Ultimately, it was, a nice place in Batavia. And I think this was actually one that I probably ran by you, Mark, a couple of years back. But, I bought it under market value, and I actually rehabbed it with the tenant still living there. Those tenants have been there about 7 years. And that was a big curveball, is dealing with tenants in a house that you're rehabbing at the same time. And so I was able to collect rent at the same time as doing this rehab. We ended up adding about 660 square footage in another bathroom to it. And all in all, it did end up going really well. I ended up pulling out about 3,500 more than what I had into it total, including a down payment, all my rehab costs and everything. So I came out of it, with an infinite return, and it was, the perfect storm. But I also had the market rising too, so that helped.
So a lot of people have issues when they inherit a tenant, and usually when they inherit a tenant, they're usually under market value. And then the concept of adding value and still having under market, or you're adding so much value that taking them up to what market rate would be is just impossible for that particular tenant's pay scale or financials. So how was this able to work for you, or did you just end up keeping a lower rent than market wise?
No, I actually did not. I mean, long time in the sales industry and the arborist world kind of prepares you. Honestly, it's a people business. Your tenants are people, and you treat them like people. You be upfront with them, and that's exactly what I was going in. I asked them what their problems were with their current landlord, what was going on, how long they've been there, and kind of came to them and told them, like, what would you like to see, change in this property? And they were all for it. I don't think they necessarily knew what they were signing on for in terms of the dust and the noise, but overall, they were really happy with it. And then, on the tail end of it, I was shooting a little bit high. I was planning on increasing by about 400 a month, 500 a month. And I was willing to settle at around 300 a month, which my numbers still made great sense at that 300 a month. And they were all for it. You know, they were very understanding of all of it and just happy to see that work was getting done because it was a house that was workable. It was a house that was still habitable. They were happy to live there, but it had a lot of deferred maintenance. It had a lot of what I call brother-in-law fixes. You know, there was an out-of-state owner and he just kept sending different people over there to hodgepodge stuff back together. So tenants were really happy to see a new owner come in and, you know, want to change the place. And they've been there 7 years and they have no interest in moving. So it, you know, there was a lot of learning on that for sure, because it's something you and your contractor both have to be willing to open that line of communication to them as the whole process is going on. Because obviously you're in their house, you're in their home. You know, it might be my house, but it's definitely their home. So being transparent with everything as it's going along and delays that come up too was a huge thing. And it, you know,
it was
overall,
pretty substantial, right?
It really was.
How much did you put in there dollar wise for that?
Dollar wise, I was into the rehab for $47,500. Okay. So, I mean, it was a decent little chunk. It wasn't anything huge, but it was enough that, you know, the basement downstairs, the split level house and the bottom side of it had been hodgepodge together, really kind of piss poorly and not up to code. And so at the same time, I did have, you know, plenty of hiccups that came in. You know, I had to put all new plumbing in the house, do all new electrical in 80% of the house.
And they're living there while you're doing this? Like that's during COVID. Like this is
during COVID. So I mean, we had plastic walls up, plastic doors up in certain areas. You know, a lot of fans, a lot of dust collectors. And my contractor.
Would you recommend this moving forward? Like, I know you got through it, but like, man, would you do that again? Because that sounds like a nightmare to me.
You know what? To be honest with you, if the tenants are on board for it and you clearly explain and just communicate with them, you know, at the end of the day, they're just people who want a better home and they don't want to move. So, I mean, I think it helped me a little bit that the majority of the rehab was in a portion of the house that they weren't using at the time, other than for storage. I mean, it was, you know, split level. They're only using the top portion. So for them, it wasn't a huge inconvenience. I mean, there was definitely noise and dust that they had to deal with, but my contractor was very respectful of them on that level, where we were blocking off a lot of vents so that they weren't getting all that dust upstairs and they weren't getting as much noise as possible. But, you know, we're installing a bathroom and we're adding another 660 square feet downstairs of finished, you know, living space. So it's got an additional office down there with a whole nother living room, including that full bath.
Give us some raw deals or numbers of that. So tell us was it on market, off market? How'd you find the deal? What it was price was and your rehab and your refi.
Yeah. Right. So my realtor at the time had brought me to this. It was pre-market at the time. Listed 170, ended up getting it for 161, standard 20% down. And then it did appraise at 175. So I had a little bit of extra in there from the get-go. I was all into it with the down payment for 83.2. And I ended up pulling out about 85.7 at the tail end of it on that refi. And luckily rates were still somewhat low. So my PITI at the end of that was 14.55. Up the rent from 17 to 1950. So I didn't quite get that full 300 that I wanted. But then I also decided to, within the following few months, I was able to kind of optimize that property a little bit. I got hooked up with Dennis Nolan, who's a tax assessment appeal attorney. And we were able to knock off $1,200 on the taxes on that property. So that saves me, you know, another $100 a month. And then after all the new electrical and the new plumbing and the new HVAC system, my insurance premium got cut in half. So my insurance went from $900 down to $430 for that entire house. So that jacks those back up. I mean, now I've got my PITI closer to 1316 and my rents are still at 1950. So I've got a pretty nice little leeway in there for reserves. Comes to a little over 600. Is it a home run cash flow wise? No. I mean, in my book, but for a single family home that lands in, you know, Geneva school districts, it's always going to stay full. And those tenants have been in there 7 years. Now they're going on 9 years. And they really don't want to move. So, I mean, eliminating that turnover cost and being responsive with them has caused them to want to stay.
I would call that a home run in that market.
You have all your money back, and you've taken care of a lot of mechanical issues down the road. Like it's sitting pretty there.
Yeah. Like a lot of people listening would call that a home run there. Like,
I mean, you always hear about those home runs.
I'll be part of any of your average deals then. That's just, let me put that out there right now.
Yeah. If you can return all my cash to me in 9 months and sit on a building, like,
yeah. No problem.
You know, a lot of lessons on the GC side too, though. You know, there was definitely a lot of, I mean, that was my first value add. I mean, buying turnkeys, come on, it's a lot easier. You close, you rent it, and you're good.
Now on the GC side though, you pretty much acted as the GC. So you put that.
I did not.
So you hired someone and they did the whole GC and you just kind of.
So I did manage to find a GC who is a working GC. So he does do a lot of the carpentry work, a lot of the framing work, does contract house stuff, obviously, but he was a working GC. So it wasn't just I'm going to come pop in on your project once a week kind of GC, which was definitely taken into account when I was running the numbers on it. And, you know, the initial estimate for the rehabs, we're at 25,000, 28, 29. So, I mean, we were right in that ballpark. So we wound up almost, 20,000 more than that. And it's plumbing issues that were incorrectly done in the past, stuff that wasn't up to code, stuff that I wanted to eliminate any sort of fire risk. And on top of that, I'm finishing a lower unit. And so with my other rentals, I've learned I hate water. I absolutely hate water. So any sort of water remediation, protective I can do on a lower level of a house, I'm going to do it. So I redid a lot of the plumbing and we installed an injection pit. And as you guys know, you got to dig up some concrete down there. I mean, there's some scope of work changes that came up as to how in depth we want to go with waterproofing everything. Because you don't want to go dump, that level of money into it and then have it fall apart with a whole bunch of water damage. I mean, overall, I do think that was, a home run for my first value add. Absolutely. Before that, I was very timid about going into that value add because it's a very complex structure, as you guys know. I mean, you're kind of combining a flip with a buy and hold, and there's a lot of avenues, especially with that cash out, where things can go a little wrong at the end if you don't have those ARV numbers completely correct.
Yeah. So let me jump in here, Zach. So a couple comments on that. So one, you put yourself in a financial position where you were able to do traditional financing there too. So on your first deal, you didn't have to use an acquisition line or a hard money line, which takes a lot of the pressure off, right? The project goes along. There's no one coming in 12 months saying, hey, you owe us back the principal. Like you set up a little bit more guideline there. And if you have that luxury, I think that's a great strategy. So I want that. And then I want to talk about these change orders here, because it's also something that's mixed. A lot of times the contractor will just, no, this was the scope of work. I'm just going to keep going. You told me this. Like a lot of times going over budget is actually a good thing. You uncover what you need to take care of and do it. So talk through those conversations. Did he say, hey man, we have an issue here. We need to take care of this. Or was it more you saying, wait a minute, like talk through that nuance? Cause I think that's a very important point. And people usually just get frustrated when in reality, hold on, this can be let's figure out the right answer here. Throw the spreadsheet aside for a second. Like we need to get this right.
So, I mean, for me too, I'm huge on my network and I'm huge on relationships, and maybe that's the Chicago in me that's rubbed off the last 15, 18 years, but I'm just huge into the relationships and I lean on those relationships quite heavily. So the GC I chose, he was not someone who was, new to me. He's someone I've known for 10, 12 years and I have a good relationship with and I trust him. And I did kind of, I gave him the general synopsis of what was going to kind of happen with this property and where my budget was. But I also did tell him, he knows from my previous rentals because he maintains my other previous rentals. I don't do any maintenance on any of them. Unless it's something outside related with trees or landscaping, I don't do anything with it. So he does the majority of it. He knows I'm a very risk adverse when it comes to water damage and water intrusion. So things that came up along the way, he would make a phone call to. And luckily with, most of my properties are pretty local and I have a lenient schedule. So I was able to kind of pop in there and get, hey, pros and cons. What are we looking at? Are we looking at 2 year? This could break. Are we looking at, it could break in 10 years, and you really have to, excuse me, kind of weigh out what's important to you as the landowner. Are you going to hold it for 5 years? Are you going to hold it for 2 years? Are you going to hold it for 20 or 30 years? For me, I want to hold the majority of what I'm going to buy for 20 or 30 years, 40 years. So, if I have plumbing issues that could be an issue in 5 years, but they're not now, but it's going to be cheaper to do now, I'm going to do it. It's kind of front loading the investment with any sort of potential repairs. So I'm not getting those middle of the night phone calls as much anymore.
So what did you do after Batavia? Talk to me about what you did next. What was your next move?
I mean, my next move after Batavia was, I wouldn't say a failure, but it has tested every level of mental and emotional strength I have in this industry, for sure. I bought a property in Glen that was supposed to be, I talked to a couple lenders end of last year, December 15th, and I knew rates were going to go up on the cash outside. And so I tried to look for something that was going to be a quick turnaround on the value add, and had about a $20,000 scope of work to do some minor changes on the interior of the house, and wound up getting COVID over the holidays. We blew a pipe. It was a pressurized cold water line over the kitchen. And needless to say, the guy who owned it before me, 40 years, and everything he did in that house was hodgepodge, duct tape, electrical tape. It was a nightmare. Still is a nightmare. I'm now waiting on countertops, and that house has been destroyed since January 7th. So my cash out rates are gone on that. But we're pushing through it. And obviously I've got an open insurance claim on it, but they're not going to cover, me removing 2 supporting walls in this house to open it up, give it an open floor concept. Luckily it's right near downtown Glen Ellen. And so long-term appreciation, it's excellent. I bought it for $210. There's a vacant lot down the street that sold for $196. So I got a house for $16,000, essentially, considering the same size vacant lot sold for, a little less than mine.
Going into it, though, what could you have done different what would you have done different, I guess, going into this? Or would you have not have bought it? Would you have looked at the inspection harder? Did you get an inspection? Break down some.
So I did get the inspection, and I did choose to do my typical 5-point investor inspection. So it was not necessarily a full inspection. However, all the problems we found were behind the walls. So even to this point, there's still nothing that came up that would have been on the inspection company by any means. It wasn't stuff that they could have seen. I blew that one pipe, but essentially the way he replumbed everything, I blew 9 more pipes in the entire house. So,
oh man,
yeah, it's it has just drastically increased the timeline of the holding period, which a lot of learning, that goes into that too. Is now you got to think about lawn maintenance, you got to think about snow plowing, you got to think about my holding costs went from 2 months to 7 now. My people that work there are getting COVID. That extends everything out. So, this one's obviously not going to be the same sort of home run, because I also didn't buy it in a way that I didn't buy it with the intent on doing a full gut remodel on this house. So in terms of the cash out rates, they're through the roof. You guys know that. So my pivot in that is opening up a HELOC on it.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and access that through that.
So a couple other things here. So if you don't mind me asking, what is this purchased? Traditional financing? Was this hard money, private funding?
Nope. This was conventional as well.
Okay. So again, you have like the bumper there. For lack of better words, you're protected, right? Yeah. Like you're not paying an astronomical rate, and you can take your time, and you're in a position where you're capitalized, where you can swallow this, right? Even if this refi doesn't go right, at some point you will get that money out, right? Like, yes. As long as you're liquid, you can survive any of these things you're talking about here. I think that's the most important message to get out there.
Absolutely. I mean, that was that was actually one of my points I wrote down too, was, going into value adds versus turnkeys is having those reserves in place. and this is a little bit more prevalent on the realtor side that I see, is that a lot of newer investors tend to want to over leverage themselves into properties, into rehabs, and it's dangerous. The less flexibility you have, the more at risk you are for losing that property. Case in point, I'm not going to name names, but I had a customer who wanted to leverage a parent's HELOC for a down payment and then leverage $25,000 in credit cards for a $24,000 bill from his, contractor. And it's like the amount of things that can go wrong. And it was a 1905 house. So it's like the amount of things you're going to find opening those walls is not going to land you at 24,000. And you're risking your parents' house. You're risking this. I mean, the amount of leverage you put on that house is, it's in direct proportion to your risk that you have into it too.
So what does the fallout look like for your Glen Ellen property? Is it, are you going to be upside down on the rental? Are you going to have to leave? I don't think it's all wrapped up, but kind of estimate, are you going to have X amount of thousands left into it that you'll get out later? Like what's the worst case scenario you got here?
So I would say that worst case scenario. So I was able to purchase this with some owner occupied conventional. So I've got a little bit less into it on that end of it. However, on the shakeout of all of it, I'm probably going to be into it for, rather than the 15 or 20 I anticipated rehab wise, I'm probably going to be stuck with 25,000 into it, including my down payment. But this house is also going to have a pretty nice spread on it from a rental perspective. I'm looking at anywhere between 2 and 22 for rentals on the comp side. So it being fully remodeled, gorgeous backyard, garage, the whole nine, even if I were to leave all that money in it and not touch it, my cash on cash and my total return is still going to be pretty sizable, something I'm happy with. Like I said, I guess wasn't necessarily planning on leaving that much money or doing that much money into it. But market rents have also gone up in that time that it's been being remodeled, which also kind of leads me into my next point of, buying properties with flexibility, buying properties with multiple exit strategies. So if one exit strategy doesn't work, you can pivot into, can I flip this, or can I just hold this for, 6 to 10 months, 2 years as maybe a lower class rental, but it's still covering its costs. You're still making a little bit of money on it. It's going into it with those multiple exit strategies that really gives you that flexibility, I feel like, to be able to pivot when things don't go necessarily 100% plan. Because right now I'm locked in at a much lower rate than a cash out rate would be right now. Mm-hmm. So, and with that, going back to that financial stability and getting yourself that high savings rate, you can bounce back from it much easier. I mean, you really can. So it's having that flexibility, I think, that really saves you through these dark ones. Because, I mean, this one in Glen Ellen is definitely one of my, it's one of those ones that's going to say, I might want to go buy a turnkey next. This has been a stressful 6-7 months. It's just, it is what it is. But
it makes you stronger.
It does. It really does. That's what pushes that growth in you, is that uncomfortability.
Yeah. So Zach, let's, one thing we're talking about Glen Ellen, Batavia, Sycamore, someone like me who never leaves the same little 2-mile radius, they could all be the same city, but I do know that they are very different. They are not the same. So how are you analyzing? Where are you geographically focusing on? Like, how do you know what rents are going to be in Glen Ellen, but also in Batavia and also in Sycamore? Like that seems to be a lot of research on your end.
So it is, but I'm also a very busy person, so I lean on virtual assistants quite heavily. I've got one out in the Philippines who's very good with research, and so I've kind of given them my couple of things that I look for in a geographic region for what I want to buy as a rental, and gave them a 20-mile radius of Geneva, Illinois, and said, come up with every city that matches these, this criteria here.
And what is that? Just like per capita, like per median income, crime, like what, just high level, what are those? What do you
high level school districts? So I'm looking for space. I chose single family as my asset class. And I feel like that's something where a lot of newer investors, they see the shiny object syndrome. And I'm going to kind of quote Brandon Turner here, is they try and build all those multiple bridges to different islands. And in reality, as a newer investor, pick your one asset class and pick your why behind that asset class. Because if you don't have that why, you're going to want to bounce around, and then you get stuck in that analysis paralysis. And For me, I like giving people space because they're not going to want to move. The more space they have, the more cost to move. They're not going to want to move. And I look for good school districts, something that if that couple or that, couple with one kid wants to have two kids, they have the space to do so. And they're already in a good school district. Everyone here knows, that turnover cost is what's going to kill you every year or every 2 years. So the longer you can keep them, the better you are. And it's, for me also, it's from a management perspective. I don't have the time to sit here and argue with someone who parked in their spot. I don't have the time to sit there and argue with someone who's stomping around in their upper unit. So the single family realm gives me more flexibility on the sales side because I can try to acquire properties at a discount. And then down the road, if I want to sell one or two here and there, I can sell one or two with a lot more flexibility and sell it at retail, which is also why I chose that single family route.
It's funny you say that because I'm coincidentally going through that on some of my original Southside purchases where it's time to, hey, we can still get a good dollar for these. Let's get rid of them. I'm actually using Jake and Mike from your team, coincidentally. But it's some of these are going to a retail client, like an end buyer, as opposed to someone who's going to rent it out to as an investor because prices have gone up so much. So Absolutely. It is like, you're getting this extra kick because you have this multiple exits, which is unintentional, but it was, I didn't have the mindset that you had there. Like I just dumb luck. It's like, I'm getting more money because some end buyer will buy this and they don't care about the cash flow.
I always tell people that whenever you have that conversation, single family versus multifamily, and when you say multifamily, call it commercial 5 and up, but you're always guarded by a cap rate when it comes to the commercial stuff. With the single family, that if it makes sense, the neighbor's gone up, the schools are good, and families want to live there, or people want to live there. It's more of an emotional, and they'll pay it. They'll pay something that doesn't make sense on the rental side because it doesn't matter. It's a neighborhood, and that's what they're doing. And that's one way you can definitely. I always say, like if you're planning on holding something really long term, like you never know what that could be. That number could be, and it doesn't matter what the rents are 10 years from now. It depends on if you're the smallest house in the block, you're gonna get the most money. So it's kind of cool.
Exactly.
Zach, what are you focusing on next? What's coming down the pipe? We got to wrap up this Glen Ellen project, get that to the finish line. But where are you still out there proactively looking? And what's next? Absolutely.
This, the way I found this Glen Ellen one, it was listed at, I think 260 and I locked in at 210. They sat on my offer for 3 weeks and that was back in December 15th of 21, right when the market was super hot, but it was sitting. I try and tell a lot of these new investors who, that I'm working with, look for the problem child, look for the problem, because as your job as an investor is to fix that problem, find the problem, fix the problem. Obviously don't fix the foundation, work up to the foundation problems and whatnot. But, the stupid little problems within a house that deter most home buyers, those are your houses. The ones that have been sitting for 40 days when the average market time is 12. What's wrong with it? Something is. It's either going to be, location, condition, or price. So, it doesn't take much to sell a house. So if it's not selling, let's find out why. Let's find out where you can make money.
Yeah, that's great advice. I'll take it one step further. If you can find it and then look up in the recorder that it's an actual estate, like if it's in a trust, keep in mind, like if you're 50 grand under list, but let's say there's 4 siblings, they're only taking a 12 grand cut. Like your numbers only, it's getting divided, and like it becomes much more easier for them to justify as opposed to one big number. That oh my God, I'm not getting 50 grand individually though. Emotionally, they're all right, 10 grand less. I'll get the money in the next 30 days. Let's do it.
Yeah, and honestly, as long as the numbers still make sense with some cushion, I'm going to continue to buy. Honestly. The rates are going to make it a lot harder. And I have noticed that on the realtor side of it, a lot of my house hackers have fell out because FHA, SST is just not, your self-sustainability test is not working out all too well. So, a lot of those people have fallen off for sure. I'm still closing deals, but it's definitely the people who were looking to leverage a lot. It's people who are taking a backseat for a little while, I feel like. I'm not scared about it. This whole, Glen Ellen project has taught me a lot, and, not every single one's going to be perfect. My first 2 value adds have definitely, the first one learned a couple of lessons, but it was, I wouldn't say a home run, but it's a solid deal. and this Glen Ellen one, I mean, all in all, long-term wise, I'm surrounded by $400,000-$600,000 houses and, vacant lots that are selling for almost what I bought the house for. So long-term wise, I ran the survey by an architect before I bought it and a builder, see kind of how big of a house I could build there if I want to develop it and then resell it down the road. And technically that one plot is still unincorporated. So my restrictions are almost nothing when it comes to setbacks. So, I mean, long-term wise, it's still a great play. And that's what I'm looking for. I mean, I don't need the money now. So it's definitely pushing it down the road as to something that's more of a further pipe dream for me, to give me a little, just more lenience in my life,
Cool. Before we wrap here, one more question. You did a lot of due diligence, getting into real estate. And part of that time was probably you setting up your foundation. But in hindsight, would you have jumped in sooner? Did you do the right amount of kind of research? Do you think you did too much? Like, what's your feeling in hindsight on that?
I would say that in hindsight, I see a lot of people getting in without enough research, which worries me. I think a lot of people see the shiny object syndrome with short-term rentals in particular. And, short-term rentals can be, as you guys know, outruled very quickly by the government, by cities, by everything. And so educating yourself on all those different risks and then finding your asset class and really honing in on that. I feel like I had the time because, obviously you get, as a newer investor, I saw this one house that I bought 9 years ago. I'm like, why don't I do more of these? Right. And, you start looking into it and it's, I can't do it with, non-owner occupied financing as easily. So then you start, constructing that base. And for me, I mean, if you're sitting on a couple $1 million, it's a little bit different story. But when you're not, you want to make sure the dollars you're putting to risk, you're at least educated on it, and really dove deep into it. And so for me, it was not only choosing my asset class that I wanted, but knowing my why behind that asset class and trying to figure out as much ins and outs of the lending environment that I could before going and talking to lenders about it. Just so that I knew what I was talking about, so that when I was talking to people, they took me seriously rather than just kind of blowing you off and not talking to you about it, or not getting back to you on it. So I think in terms of education wise, venture out from the YouTube videos, get more into podcasts, get more into the audiobooks, and really diversify who you're learning from. I see a lot of people who only learn one, like the Bigger Pockets way, or they'll only learn the Ken McElroy way. Like, combine that knowledge so that you can kind of choose your own course in a way.
Yep. I think that's a huge skill that people going in on is being able to look at everyone in the room's perspective and be able to make your own. I think it's a challenge for a lot of people. But I think that's something that if you're good at that, you can do so many good things in life.
Yeah, like we're oversimplified people. It's like, this is the roadmap. I'm just going to follow this exactly.
Yeah,
the world doesn't work that way, man.
All right, cool. We're going to wrap. I'm going to rephrase this first question because you kind of just answered it, and I didn't mean to ask it that way. But what, as a real estate broker, investment-minded broker, which you are right now, what's your competitive advantage?
My competitive advantage is that my areas that I work, I know them very well. Block by block, city by city, I can tell you what I need to know about them. And the areas that I don't know, I have dove deep into those areas. So western suburbs, Tri-Cities area, to the north, to the south, too, of that, reach out. I mean, my competitive advantage is that I grew my network through the arborist world for many years before I got into real estate. So my network of contractors all the way through, from every aspect of a house, every aspect of a building, I managed to hold on to the people that were introduced to me by some people, Mark Ainley himself, but also just being honest with people, really just be honest with people, be true, and have integrity about things.
Cool. Awesome. Is it safe to say that your network in the arborist world bloomed?
Yes.
Yeah. Horrible dad joke. I'm sorry.
That'll be our teaser clip.
Go. Next question.
All right. Zach, what's one piece of advice you would tell someone that is yet to buy their first property here in the Chicagoland area?
First piece of advice, choose your asset class and know why you're choosing that asset class. Do not get wrapped up in the huge cash on cash returns that some asset classes can offer. Know your why behind it.
Awesome. All right. What do you do for fun?
I ride the Harley, man. That is my freedom. That is all the phones go off. Just me and the wind. And I lift weights. I got to stay in shape somehow.
Nice.
There we go. Zach, you mentioned a few already, but give us a good book, podcast, or self-development activity that you would recommend to our listeners.
Self-development activity. Be an early riser. Get up. I mean, I spent 2 years getting up at 4 a.m. to read for 2 hours before going to work. Whether you read, whether you do some yoga in there, whatever it is, it sets your brain up right for the day. It gets you going. Maybe not 4 a.m. It's a little rough for a lot of people. I get that, but get up before work, before your family's up, before life hits you with all those problems. Devote that time to building yourself. And in terms of books, if you decide to go down the single family route, check out Landlording on Autopilot by Mike Butler. It's an excellent read. I probably have read it once a year. Just a great book. Has a lot of good nitty-gritty tools that you can put to use.
All right. Besides yourself, name one person in your local network that you'd highly recommend to other investors.
Just one?
Rattle off a couple if you need.
All right. Anything when it comes to property management, this guy right here, Mark Ainley, has helped me. Maybe an unofficial mentor, you call him, whatever it is, friend. Reach out for anything property management with them. And another one would be 𝗫𝗃𝗀𝗀𝗵𝘁 as an attorney. He's not only an excellent attorney, he's got probably more jokes than anyone I know in this industry.
Nice.
Which is important. So
it is.
Zach, thank you so much. You provide a ton of value to our listeners. How can they learn more about you? Is there any way they can provide value to you?
They can provide value to me by just coming to me and asking me questions about how to grow their portfolio. Because I've learned, me teaching, me trying to help others, it helps me too. So by all means, reach out, whether it be Instagram, my email, phone number, shoot me a text, does not matter. I'm always willing to help you no matter what stage of the game you're at, if I can help you.
Awesome. All right, Mark, who we doing this one for?
We're doing this one for Brett Koenig out of California. So we shipped a shirt to him in California. So maybe that's you going by disguise and sending something out of California to make us look better, but it's someone out of state. It's the first time I've seen out of state. So you can hear my voice. I'm really giddy about it.
So side note to our listeners, I don't know if you knew this, but when we don't make much off these, it's like $1 or $2 on top of whatever the cost is. And we forgot to add shipping for the first couple of orders. So we were the first 30 shirts that went out a year ago, we were paying, and then we realized we were losing money. So I'm glad we figured that out, because shipping to California was probably $10 or whatever.
Yep. So happy no one out of state ordered sooner.
All right. So we mentioned our guest today is from Maine. And Mark, I don't know if you knew this, but Maine is actually one of the 29 townships in Cook County. I did not know that. But each of these suburbs is in Maine Township, except, and the suburbs are Des Plaines, Park Ridge, Rosemont, Elk Grove. Which one of those is not in Maine Township?
Elk Grove.
Man, it's in your backyard and you got it.
Well, Elk Grove is in Elk Grove Township. So
yeah,
I actually knew that one too. So I tried to make it easy.
Yeah. No, I knew that one. That's awesome. It's awesome.
You're on fire, by the way. I don't know when these are getting. I don't know if we're changing up the order when these get released, but you're we got a winning streak going here.
I know. For the townships, for the tax contesting, that's how I've learned all the cities in the township, just from contesting tax every year.
Mine are all Jefferson.
Yeah.
My 6 neighborhoods fall in one township.
You only thought there was one township.
Yeah, I had no idea there was another.
All right, Zach, it was awesome having you on here. I appreciate all you did preparation for the show. I appreciate the time you put into that. This will be a great show. A lot of people will get a lot of good tips from you. Tom, thank you very much. As always, listeners, please refer to a friend. I feel like I'm begging. Maybe I got to change up this ending too much, but hear me out, everybody. Continue to share us with your friends so we can watch our numbers grow, so we can continue to attract other people that want to come on here and add value. So, Zach, thank you. Tom, as always, thank you. And listeners, we'll see you next week.
Thanks all.
Thank you.